This time, let's try to get to China. Consumes. Oh, if you don't delve deep, there's no point. The last time we dug one together, you dug so deep that Richard Jaeckel had spent 50 years creating movies by the time I crawled out in the morning. Just for the Dirty Dozen, he made $200,000. He was referred to as the most reliable actor by the studios. Why then did he pass away in a shared hospital room, penniless? The answer includes a wife who was unable to recall their marriage, an illness that shouldn't have killed him, and debt that ate up everything. At age 67, Jaeckel lost his house while other celebrities retired wealthy. The cruelest fate was in store for the man who remained modest while coaching small league. The timing of Richard Jaeckel's family's move was perfect, and it transformed his life. He was born in Long Beach, New York, on October 10, 1926. His mother had lofty aspirations, and his father was a businessman. They had enough to survive, but they weren't wealthy. The family relocated to Los Angeles around the beginning of the 1940s. California's film industry was flourishing. When the United States was deep in World War, the jobs were opening up all across Hollywood, and studios were expanding quickly. Richard was in the right place at the right time just by that action. Like most children his age, he might have enlisted in the military if they had remained in Long Beach. But he discovered something else in law. It all began when his mother became friends with Louella Parsons, one of the most influential people in the movie business. She had more than 20 million subscribers for her gossip column. Careers might be made or broken by her opinion. Richard was hired as a mailboy at 20th Century Fox in 1943 as a result of this connection. At the age of 17, he was earning $18 a week, or roughly $280 in today's currency. However, this was no ordinary errand. Over a vast 176-acre property, he was transporting letters between studio executives, big-name actors, and top executives. He had a close-up look at the filmmaking process. He saw how actors performed. Behind the scenes, he could see the strain, and he was gaining attention, slowly and unconsciously. Then everything changed one morning. Director Rufus Lemaire was searching for young actors to play Marines in a new war film called Guadalcanal Diary when Richard entered the casting office while delivering mail. The movie had a $1 budget. Preston Foster and other well-known individuals were among the 2 million. Fresh-faced youngsters who resembled actual troops were still needed, though. Lemaire believed Richard looked the part right away since he was youthful, sincere, and genuine. Richard was given the opportunity to take a screen test within minutes. The test was completed in about 3 days. Even though it lasted barely 15 minutes, it was sufficient. He was immediately cast as Private Sus Alvarez by director Louis Serre. Richard made $750 for 6 weeks of filming, which is more than a male boy would have made in 10 months. His acting career was launched when the film earned over $3 million. Then he did something that very few performers would ever think of. Richard chose to enlist in the military rather than follow the trend. He enlisted in 1944, a year after his major break, and remained in service until 1948. Given the growing popularity of war films, most actors would have done anything to remain in Hollywood, but Richard felt obligated to do so. According to some accounts, he enlisted in the Navy, but others claim he was a member of the Merchant Marine. Complicated service records were common in those days. In any case, he forfeited years of developing his profession, while people his age were gaining notoriety and landing major roles. In 1948, he came home, all but forgotten. Sands of Iwima followed in 1949. Once more, it altered everything. As PFC Frank Flynn, he was cast with John Wayne. Richard wasn't playing along this time either. He had experienced it. His actual combat experience gave his part a subdued intensity that viewers accepted without understanding why. The film was well received. It received 4 nominations for Oscars. Although Wayne received accolades, Richard's performance was noteworthy for another reason. He was not posing as a soldier. He was one. Because of his natural chemistry with Wayne, the studios saw that he was given more jobs, but they were all of the same type. He established himself as the authority on real war movies. Richard was ubiquitous in the ensuing years. He starred in The Gunfighter, Wyoming Mail, and Battleground City Across the River from 1949 to 1952. He had only one scene in the last one. He portrayed a brazen young man who loses a duel with Gregory Peak. It was a brief but impactful scene. It demonstrated both his skill and the pitfalls he had encountered. The studios only wanted him to play rugged soldiers and cowboys because he was so good at them. Richard was paid significantly less for working just as hard, often on several films at once, than the main males who were making fortunes. He developed into a dependable, steady workhorse who was never the standout. Then, an unforeseen event occurred. He played a part in Come Back Little Sheba in 1952. He portrayed Turk, a brazen and feisty young man who was pursuing Terry Moore's persona. It was the exact reverse of what he usually did. Critics were taken aback. He was hailed by the New York Times as being skilled at pursuing her sexually. There was excitement in his scenes with Moore. For the first time, people realized he was capable of more than just fighting on film. With $3.5 million, the film did well. The Oscar for Best Actress went to Shirley Booth. For a brief while, it appeared like Richard would finally break free from the stereotyped cast, but Hollywood remained the same. He continued to be viewed by studios as the trustworthy sidekick, soldier, and supporting actor who could carry a scene without taking center stage on a poster, and they continued reassigning him to the same uniform even after he demonstrated his depth and range. Richard Jaeckel was more than simply a soldier or tough guy. He was one of them. However, he entered a more sinister phase in 1961. He portrayed Corporal Birdwell Scott, one of 4 American troops charged with raping a 16-year-old German girl, in the film Town Without Pity. For its period, the story was particularly unsettling. Long before there were ratings like R or PG-13, the advertisements referred to it as adults only. The movie took place in 1960, shortly after the United States formally concluded its occupation of West Germany. Christine Kaufman, the young victim, eventually married Tony Curtis in real life, and Kirk Douglas played the defense lawyer. Among a cast that included Mal Sandock, Robert Blake, and Frank Sutton, Jaeckel held his own. Gene Pitney's mournful theme song for the movie was nominated for an Oscar, but lost to Moon River. Nevertheless, the film made an impression, and Jaeckel demonstrated that he could play ethically challenging parts without recoiling. Then came 1967. At that point, Jaeckel donned the suit once more, this time for The Dirty Dozen as Sergeant Clyde Boran. It became into his most well-known part. He portrayed the tough MP who was responsible for preparing 12 military detainees for a suicide attempt. When Boran did speak, it came down with a bang. I believe one of those loves will shoot the major in the head the first time he gets the chance. He said to Lee Marvin's character, "Sir, He had the responsibility of accurately and stoically reading out each prisoner's punishment. After 30 years of arduous work, Franco Vr died by hanging. Vladkem. The scene gained notoriety. Jaeckel returned for the TV sequel in 1985, some 20 years after the film's success. He wasn't merely a cast member. He secured it. He brought the military to life. He brought discipline, grit, and quiet fortitude to the screen, and audiences never forgot it. However, his career took a major turn on a beach. Paul Newman saw Jaeckel playing with his children at Malibu in 1970. It was a fortuitous moment, with no auditions or agents. Newman was occasionally working on a brilliant idea, a play based on a Ken Kesey book. He saw more than just a rough person in Jaeckel as he splashed and laughed with his kids. He saw more than just a brother on screen. Someone has the integrity and love to portray his character's brother. Newman argued that studio executives weren't sold, and he was successful. Jaeckel was chosen to play Joe Stamper, a logger in a recalcitrant Oregon family torn between devotion and hate. It was more than a role. It was the role that allowed him to demonstrate his true abilities. Jaeckel received his first and only Oscar nomination for the performance. The year was 1972. He was 45. The Academy finally witnessed what Newman had witnessed on that beach after almost 3 decades in Hollywood. They noticed the layers, the humor in the suffering, and the tenderness beneath the sharp edge. Critics described it as tragic yet humorous. This time, he wasn't acting like a soldier. He wasn't reading death sentences or giving commands. He was merely a man attempting to keep a damaged family together while torn between pride and heartache. The Oscar did not go to him. However, that nomination summed it up. It demonstrated that Richard Jaeckel was more than simply your average tough guy. He was an actor of seriousness. You wouldn't anticipate Richard Jaeckel to become a major star in television in the 1950s. He loved movies, tough, resilient, and trustworthy. However, his performance in a live television drama was just astounding. Jaeckel jumped right in, while most performers were frightened of live broadcasts. Not all of the drama on shows like the U.S. Steel Hour was scripted. Live high-wire acts were what they were. The entire nation would notice a single error. But Jaeckel was standing next to celebrities like Helen Hayes and Paul Newman. He even joined superstars like Lily Palmer and Rex Harrison to perform live on Playhouse 90 for 90 minutes in a row. In 1961, he landed his first major television job in Frontier Circus, thanks to the same audacity. There was more to it than a Western. It took place in the 1880s and featured a horse-drawn circus. Jaeckel portrayed Tony Gentry, the man who rode ahead of the troupe to set up concerts in wild, arid communities, in the filming that took place in Nevada and California. CBS provided it a prime time slot and sufficient funding for well-known guests, despite the hazardous nature of the idea. The show featured Elizabeth Montgomery, Sammy Davis Jr., and Mickey Rooney in just 26 episodes. Jaeckel's persona was completely unique, with elements of cowboy and carny. Although the presentation ended quickly, viewers were captivated by his performance, which led to a trend. Jaeckel would frequently appear on shows that hardly survived a season. Nevertheless, he always made an impression. Consider the 1930s La setting of Banyan. Despite its brief run of 15 episodes, commentators praised Jaeckel's portrayal of Lat McNeil as its high point. He portrayed firefighter Hank Myers in the January-August 1974 television series Firehouse. He was the lone cast member from the initial pilot, which starred Richard Roundtree, and only 13 episodes were broadcast. The producers were aware of his ability to keep a plot together. He even agreed to star in the outrageous ABC series Salvage One, which tells the story of a junk salesman who constructs a rocket to the moon. Only 16 of the 20 episodes that were made were shown. However, Jaeckel's portrayal of FBI agent Jack Klinger will never be forgotten. He delivered, whether it was a moonshot fantasy or a police drama. He played it straight, even in a sitcom like At Ease, which ran in 1983. As a rule-abiding officer, Major Hawkins, he was consistently outwitted by cunning warriors. Jaeckel was the glue once more, even if it only lasted 14 episodes. He was steady, not ostentatious. He was excellent because of this. Next was Baywatch. Jaeckel made a comeback to television in 1991-1994, playing the role of Lateet Ben Edwards, the beach's most seasoned and well-liked lifeguard. By that time, he was in his 60s and fighting in secret against the melanoma that would kill him a few years later. But he remained difficult on screen. After saving a drowning fisherman by jumping 100 feet, his character broke his hip and lost the ability to swim. Nevertheless, he received a promotion to captain. He served as a mentor to David Hasselhoff's Mitch Buchanan and was a representation of tenacity. The odd thing is that he had previously starred as a different lifeguard, who died rescuing a toddler in the 1989 Baywatch pilot. Producers wanted him on the program, so they brought him back regardless, scripting a new character. For many viewers throughout the world, this was their first encounter with Jaeckel. He was a part of the world's biggest show at an age when most actors slacked down. Behind the scenes, however, he was always in misery. His 14-month-old kid went into a swimming pool while he and his wife Antoinette were in San Francisco in 1948. Nobody witnessed it. The youngster, who was hardly able to walk, had disappeared in silence. Tragedy might have resulted. However, John Marches, Jaeckel's uncle, just so happened to enter the backyard at that precise moment. He got the youngster out of the water barely in time after spotting him in there. According to research, as little as 4 minutes of submersion can cause brain injury. Even though the rescue happened so quickly that it was nearly unbelievable, Jaeckel was completely taken aback. He was transformed by that one instant. He never forgot how close he was to losing his son, which made him fiercely protective of his family. Jaeckel maintained his groundedness in a field rife with absenteeism and vanity. He refused to allow celebrity take him too far from home, spent time with his children, and coached Little League in West Law. His wife was given an Alzheimer's diagnosis years later. He remained with her. He continued to work and provide for his family, even after declaring bankruptcy in 1994. It's possible that his personal suffering contributed to his acting prowess. He played a man who drowns beneath a tree, while Paul Newman attempts to save him in the 1971 film Sometimes a Great Notion. The sequence is slow, dramatic, eerie, and unforgettable. Jaeckel was nominated for an Oscar for it, but it was more than simply acting. He had witnessed the struggle for survival in the sea. He carried that fear with him to the scene since he had experienced it firsthand. Throughout his life, Richard Jaeckel maintained his health. He appeared younger than his years, never smoked, and maintained his fitness for decades. His friends used to joke that he never seemed to age. However, in 1994, at the age of 68, he received news that dispelled all of his convictions. It was not just any skin cancer. He had melanoma. It was sophisticated. It seemed like a cruel joke to a man who was so concerned about his health. The cause was what made it even more terrible. Jaeckel had been surfing all her life. He cherished the freedom, the waves, and the beach. He surfed shirtless in the California sun for years. Fearless and fair-skinned, he never considered hiding. He shunned the sun, but not smokes. And he received it from the sun. By the time the cancer was discovered, it was too late to prevent it, and doctors thought it was brought on by all those hours of unprotected surfing. The diagnosis didn't slow him down. He had just finished playing Baywatch's Let Ben Edwards at the time. He was still getting roles and remained busy into his late 60s. He was still renowned in Hollywood. Over the course of his 5-decade career, he had appeared in more than 70 films. But life plunged him into a tempest just when things should have been ending amicably. Richard Jaeckel declared bankruptcy at the beginning of 1994. It was a startling figure, debt of $1.7 million. This wasn't a minor error or a temporary problem. Everything he had worked for was falling apart. At the age of 67, he had nothing left after more than 50 years in Hollywood and more than 150 parts in movies and television shows. Jaeckel was drowning at a time when most actors would be retired and happily sleeping. It was difficult to accept that he had been employed consistently since 1943. He was just a youngster when he was discovered by a casting director at 20th Century Fox. Guadalcanal Diary, his debut movie, was the beginning of a career that never truly slowed. He earned $200,000 in 1967 as a star of big-budget films like The Dirty Dozen. In 1971, he was even nominated for an Oscar for Sometimes a Great Ideation. Now, however, none of it mattered. The funds had vanished. The expenditures weren't covered by the honor. It was more than just a formal bankruptcy filing. The fall was made public. His house in Brentwood, one of the priciest neighborhoods in Los Angeles, was the first to depart. It was more than a house. It was evidence of his accomplishments, a prize. The elite lived in Brentwood after decades of hard labor, and now he was being evicted. Almost everything else went with the house. To pay off his obligations, he auctioned off furniture, prizes, pictures, memories, and other stuff gathered over 50 years of employment. This was no graceful downsize or quiet departure. He had been forcibly removed from the life he had created. The worst thing was that he was robbed of all the memories associated with his time spent working with legendary figures like Paul Newman, Lee Marvin, and John Wayne. He appeared to be a survivor on screen thanks to his work, but he was being crushed in real life. Then, the most agonizing chapter began. He relocated to Woodland Hills Motion Picture and Television Retirement Community. The establishment of that facility was intended to assist those in the sector who had fallen on hard times. It was constructed with compassion in mind. However, Jaeckel felt deeply humiliated by the move. Brentwood had been his home. He had received star-level compensation. And now, when Richard Jaeckel started his last battle with cancer, he was living on charity with others who had been overlooked by the system. Antoinette, his wife, was found to have Alzheimer's. Since May 29, 1947, they had been wed, 50 years of dating. Then everything began to unravel. Richard's melanoma was malignant. Mentally, Antoinette, the woman who had supported him through every movie, studio agreement, and arduously earned part, was gradually vanishing. The timing was brutal. Richard's wife's memories disappeared as his body weakened. The woman who used to applaud him on the set had forgotten who he was. He had made it through Hollywood. This, however, was different. He was being eaten away by cancer. He was powerless to stop Alzheimer's from taking over her thoughts. He had played tough, calm characters on screen for decades. However, he was now merely a man observing his wife's disappearance. A little more of her vanished each day. Decades of love, arguments, holidays, and dreams were all disappearing along with her. Everything had been shared between them. They were both prisoners now. In 1994, Richard went into the Woodland Hills retirement residence for film and television. He would remain there until June 14, 1997, 3 years later, when he passed away. He was 70. He had already lost almost everything by that point: his home, his wife's mental state, and even his health. In 1994, he declared bankruptcy. $1.7 million is his debt. The Brentwood house was gone. Most of his belongings were gone. All that was left was a hospital bed, painkillers, and the heartbreaking sorrow of seeing Antoinette deteriorate rapidly into Alzheimer's. It wasn't simply old age. Emotional agony was what it was. There, but not truly, was his wife. She was not reachable, but she was alive. They were divided by something more profound than walls, even within the same room. He had acted in more than 150 TV shows and movies. Giants like Gregory Peck, Lee Marvin, and John Wayne had stood with him. However, there were no cameras, loud lights, or cheers during those last few years. But he wasn't left behind. Richard was escorted inside the retirement facility by Gregory Peck himself. Richard got accepted 3 days after the call. He had not been forgotten in Hollywood. Officially, no. He got a place to stay, thanks to the Motion Picture and Television Fund. He received recognition from the industry, but it didn't make up for it. Despite being surrounded by people, Richard felt isolated. His wife's presence was what he most needed. Not only did her body recognize him, but her eyes and voice also called him by name. That had vanished. He passed away in silence. At the very location that had attempted to console him, he died of cancer. The hidden hospital of an actor in Woodland Hills. A weary guy, a shared room, and the bitter conclusion of a lengthy voyage were all that remained of the glitz. The media hardly reported on his death. Short articles appeared in a few trade journals. There were no TV tributes, but several admirers shared their recollections online. Instead of a farewell, a guy who had toiled tirelessly for more than 50 years received a whisper. The supporters, however, remembered. Early online forums were overrun by those who had grown up watching him in westerns and war movies. They expressed gratitude, tales, and clips. Many were unaware that he had lost his house and that he had fought cancer while taking care of a wife who was unable to recall their time together. The shock was severe. Tragically, the reality was straightforward. With hardly a headline to market, a guy who had a lengthy and prestigious profession had passed away quietly and broke. The press's silence wasn't the most notable thing. Richard was the one. He never voiced any complaints. Not about the lack of care, not about the cancer, and not about the money. He handled everything as if he has handled every role in his life with composure. He didn't try to win people over or make news. He made no request for preferential treatment. He persevered. According to his sons Richard Jr. and Barry, he never displayed resentment. He maintained his dignity even in the final moments, when everything was crumbling. He never broke down for the cameras or begged. His style was never like that. He let his art do the talking. And that was all he wanted in the end. To be known for his mannerisms rather than for what he lost.